Marcus Chen wiped the grease from his weathered hands as he examined the alien power core, humming on his workbench. 73 years old and still the sharpest engineer this side of the Kepler belt, he had spent the last 2 decades on this forgotten moon, turning discarded alien technology into something useful. The junkyard stretched for miles around his modest workshop, filled with the remnants of a dozen different species who had passed through this sector and left their broken dreams behind. The power core belonged to a Thraxian cruiser that had crash-landed here 5 years ago. Most salvagers would have stripped it for basic components and moved on, but Marcus saw potential where others saw scrap. He had been working on reverse engineering the quantum resonance matrix for months, slowly unraveling the elegant alien physics that made their faster-than-light drives possible. A low rumble shook the workshop, rattling tools on their magnetic strips. Marcus frowned and looked up through the reinforced windows. 3 shapes moved across the amber sky, their silhouettes unmistakably draconic, real dragons, not the mechanical imitations that some species favored for their ships. These were living creatures, scales gleaming like polished metal, wings spanning easily 200 meters each. Marcus had heard stories about the Dreknari, the ancient dragon-like beings who ruled a small but powerful empire in the Outer Rim. They were said to be proud, territorial, and utterly convinced of their own superiority. They also had a reputation for incinerating anyone who disrespected them, which made their presence here both fascinating and terrifying. The dragons circled his compound once, twice, then began their descent. Marcus felt his heart rate spike, but his engineer's mind was already analyzing their flight patterns, noting the way they compensated for the moon's low gravity and thin atmosphere. Even in a potentially life-threatening situation, he couldn't help but admire the biomechanical perfection of their movement. They landed with surprising grace in the cleared area in front of his workshop, their massive forms creating small dust storms that quickly settled in the low gravity. The largest of the 3, its scales a deep emerald shot through with gold veins, stepped forward. When it spoke, its voice resonated through both sound and some form of telepathic projection that made Marcus's teeth ache. "Human engineer," the dragon said, its words carefully pronounced despite the obvious difficulty of forming human sounds with a reptilian throat. "We seek the one called Marcus Chen, builder of impossible things." Marcus stepped outside, acutely aware of how small and fragile he must appear to these magnificent creatures. "That would be me," he said, proud that his voice remained steady. "Though I'm curious how you know my name. I don't exactly advertise my services to galactic royalty." The dragon's head tilted, golden eyes studying him with an intelligence that seemed far older than the stars themselves. "Your reputation precedes you, small human. The Zinthari merchant who brought us a quantum drive matrix that should not exist spoke of an elderly human who works miracles from refuse. We have need of such miracles." The second dragon, slightly smaller with silver-blue scales, snorted dismissively. "This frail creature? Korthek, surely you jest. How could something so weak and short-lived possess knowledge beyond our own?" Marcus felt a familiar spark of irritation. He'd dealt with arrogant aliens before, beings who assumed that humanity's relative youth as a spacefaring species meant they had nothing to offer. It was a mistake that had cost more than a few of them dearly over the years. "Weak and short-lived, maybe," Marcus said, walking calmly toward the dragons despite every survival instinct screaming at him to run. "But that just means we have to get creative to survive. You want to see what this frail human can do? Let me show you something." He gestured toward a section of the junkyard where a massive Kalian dreadnought sat, half buried in the lunar soil. The ship had been declared completely unsalvageable by 3 different salvage companies. Its quantum core had been completely destroyed, its hull cracked in 17 places, and its navigation systems fried beyond repair. "Watch," Marcus said, pulling out a small remote control he'd cobbled together from salvaged parts. The dreadnought's lights began to flicker on, one section at a time. Then, with a deep thrumming that they could feel in their bones, the massive ship began to rise. It lifted slowly, gracefully, shedding decades of accumulated dust and debris. The hull breaches had been sealed with an intricate network of metalwork that actually looked better than the original design. New engines, obviously built from mismatched components, glowed with steady blue fire. "Impossible," whispered the third dragon, the smallest one with scales like burnished copper. "That ship was dead." "We saw the salvage reports ourselves," Marcus smiled, noting the way all 3 dragons had suddenly become much more attentive. The trick isn't having the best technology, he said, gently setting the dreadnought back down. It's understanding how to make different technologies work together, even when they weren't designed to. Especially when they weren't designed to. The lead dragon, Korthak, lowered his great head until he was nearly at eye level with Marcus. We were told you could work miracles, human. Now we see the truth of it. We have come seeking your aid because our most sacred possession has been damaged, and our greatest engineers say it cannot be repaired. What kind of damage are we talking about? Marcus asked, his professional curiosity overriding his caution. The heart of Draconis, Korthak said, his voice carrying a weight of reverence and desperation. A crystalline matrix that has powered our homeworld for 10,000 years. It was damaged in a recent conflict with the Void Seekers, and now our world slowly dies. Our engineers say the damage is too extensive, the crystal's quantum structure too complex to rebuild. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, a 10,000-year-old alien artifact with quantum properties. It was the kind of challenge that made his old engineer's heart sing. But he also sensed there was more to this story than they were telling him. Why come to me? He asked. Surely your own people, with all their advanced technology and centuries of experience, would be better suited to fix something so important to your culture. The silver-blue dragon's eyes flashed with something that might have been shame. Because, she said reluctantly, the damage was caused by our own pride and stupidity, and sometimes, human engineer, it takes an outsider to see solutions that we cannot. Marcus followed the three dragons to their ship, a magnificent vessel that looked like it had been grown rather than built. Its hull curved in organic lines that reminded him of bone and sinew, covered in scales that shifted color in the moonlight. As they approached, a section of the hull simply dissolved, revealing an interior that took his breath away. The corridors were vast and cathedral-like, designed for beings who flew as naturally as they walked. Bioluminescent panels provided gentle lighting, and the air hummed with an energy that made his skin tingle. But what impressed Marcus most was the craftsmanship. Every surface showed the kind of attention to detail that came from centuries of accumulated skill and pride. Your ship is beautiful, Marcus said honestly. I've seen a lot of alien vessels over the years, but nothing quite like this. The copper-scaled dragon, who had introduced herself as Vayrana, preened slightly at the compliment. This is the Stellar Talon, crafted by my own ancestors 300 years ago. Every component was shaped by dragon fire and blessed by the heart itself. They led him to the ship's central chamber, where a massive crystal sat in a cradle of living metal. The heart of Draconis was easily 3 meters tall and 2 meters wide, its faceted surface catching and refracting light in ways that seemed to defy physics. But even Marcus's untrained eye could see the damage. A jagged crack ran from top to bottom, and the crystal's normally steady glow flickered like a dying star. The Void Seekers used a resonance weapon, Korthak explained, his voice heavy with old anger. It was designed specifically to shatter crystalline matrices. When it struck the heart, the feedback destroyed their weapon and their ship, but the damage was already done. Marcus circled the crystal slowly, his engineer's eye cataloging every detail. The crack wasn't just a simple fracture. It had disrupted the quantum lattice structure throughout the entire crystal. Worse, he could see secondary stress fractures beginning to form, spreading slowly but inevitably toward the crystal's core. How long before complete failure? He asked. Our calculations suggest 18 of your months, said Zephys, the silver-blue dragon. Maybe less if the secondary fractures accelerate. Marcus pulled out a portable scanner, one of his own design that combined human engineering with salvaged alien components. The readings made him whistle softly. The energy patterns within the crystal were incredibly complex, layered in ways that suggested multiple dimensions of quantum interaction. It was beautiful, elegant, and completely beyond anything humanity had achieved. I need to understand how this thing works before I can even think about fixing it, Marcus said. Can you show me the technical specifications? The three dragons exchanged glances. There are no technical specifications, Vayrana said quietly. The heart was created by the ancients, the first generation of our people. The knowledge of its construction was lost during the Great Forgetting, 7,000 years ago. Marcus felt a familiar chill. He'd encountered this before with other species, ancient technologies that had become so integrated into their cultures that they'd stopped understanding how they worked. When those technologies failed, entire civilizations could collapse. So you've been maintaining it by intuition and tradition for 7,000 years? He asked. Our engineers understand the basic principles, Korthak said defensively. We know how to channel its power, how to adjust its output, how to replace the focusing arrays when they wear out. But the deep structure, the quantum foundations, that knowledge died with those who came before us. Marcus nodded, understanding more than they might have expected. Humanity had gone through something similar during the Dark Ages, losing technologies that took centuries to rediscover. The difference was that humans had lost relatively simple things like concrete and running water. The dragons had lost knowledge that was orders of magnitude more complex. All right, Marcus said, setting down his scanner and rolling up his sleeves. I'll need 3 things. First, I need access to your historical records. Anything that might give me clues about how this was originally built. Second, I need a complete energy map of how the crystal interfaces with your ship and your homeworld's power grid. Third, I need you to trust me to try some very unconventional approaches. What kind of unconventional approaches? Zephys asked suspiciously. Marcus grinned, the expression transforming his weathered face. The kind that would probably horrify your traditional engineers. I'm thinking we start by introducing some controlled instability into the quantum matrix. See if we can encourage the fracture to heal itself. It's risky, but risky how? Korthak interrupted. Well, if I get it wrong, the crystal could explode with enough force to vaporize this moon, Marcus said cheerfully. But on the bright side, if I get it right, your heart should be stronger than it was originally. The silence that followed was long and profound. Finally, Virana spoke up. Human Marcus, are you suggesting that you, with no training in our technology and no understanding of our methods, can not only repair the heart of Draconis but actually improve upon the work of the ancients? Marcus looked at the flickering crystal, his mind already running through possibilities. That's exactly what I'm suggesting. You see, your ancients were clearly brilliant, but they were working within the constraints of their own knowledge and assumptions. Sometimes it takes a complete outsider, someone who doesn't know what's supposed to be impossible, to find solutions that the experts miss. He walked over to a section of the crystal where the crack was particularly pronounced. For instance, you've been thinking of this as a single massive crystal that needs to be repaired. But what if we approach it as a modular system instead? What if the crack isn't damage to be fixed but an opportunity to upgrade? Explain, Korthak said, his golden eyes fixed on Marcus with laser intensity. Well, right now you have one crystal trying to handle all the quantum processing for an entire world. That's incredibly elegant, but it's also a single point of failure. What if we could segment the quantum matrix, create multiple processing nodes that work together? The crack could become a natural division point. Marcus pulled out a piece of chalk and began sketching on the chamber floor, his movements quick and confident. We introduce a networked architecture with redundant pathways and distributed processing. Each segment handles a portion of the load, but they're all quantum entangled with each other. If one segment fails, the others compensate automatically. The dragon stared at his crude diagram, and Marcus could practically see the gears turning in their ancient minds. The power output would be more stable, Virana said slowly, and the system would be essentially self-repairing. Exactly. Plus, we could build in expansion capability. Want to power more worlds? Just add more segments to the network. It's scalable, robust, and best of all, it works with the damage instead of fighting against it. Zephys shook her great head. This is madness. You're talking about completely redesigning the most sacred artifact of our people, based on human engineering principles that we don't understand. Marcus looked up at her, his expression serious for the first time since they'd met. I'm talking about saving your world and your people. But you're right, it is madness. The question is, do you trust this old human engineer enough to let him try? Because conventional wisdom says your heart can't be fixed, and conventional wisdom is going to let your homeworld die. The journey to Draconis Prime took 6 days, during which Marcus threw himself into studying everything the dragons could provide about their crystal technology. Ancient texts written in flowing script, energy readings that made his salvaged equipment scream in protest, and theoretical frameworks that pushed the boundaries of even his considerable knowledge. What fascinated him most wasn't what the dragons knew, but what they'd forgotten. Hidden in their oldest archives were references to the Song of Making, a harmonic resonance technique that seemed to be central to the original crystal's creation. The dragons dismissed it as religious poetry, but Marcus recognized it as sophisticated engineering documentation disguised in mythological language. "Your ancestors were clever," he told Korthak, as they reviewed another set of ancient texts. "They embedded technical specifications in your cultural traditions. This song of making isn't just ceremony, it's a precise set of quantum harmonics." Korthak's massive head tilted in confusion. "Impossible. The song has been performed at every sacred ceremony for millennia. If it contained actual technical information, our engineers would have noticed." Marcus pulled up a spectrographic analysis he'd run on a recording of the song. "Your engineers were looking for modern patterns. But look at this. The mathematical relationships between the notes, the timing intervals, the way certain phrases repeat. It's all there, hidden in plain sight." Virana leaned over his shoulder, her copper eyes studying the readouts. "These frequency patterns, they match the quantum resonance signatures we use for crystal tuning." "Exactly. Your ancestors didn't just build the heart of Draconis. They created an entire cultural framework to preserve the knowledge of how to maintain and rebuild it. But 7,000 years of accumulated tradition obscured the technical details. The revelation sent ripples of excitement and unease through the Dragon crew. Sacred tradition suddenly revealed as engineering manuals challenged fundamental assumptions about their culture. But Marcus pressed on, driven by the growing certainty that he was on the right track. When they reached Draconis Prime, Marcus understood immediately why the dragons were so desperate. The planet below was magnificent, its surface covered in crystalline cities that sparkled like jewels against vast forests and azure oceans. But even from orbit, he could see the signs of decay. Some of the cities were dark, their crystal spires no longer glowing with inner light. The planetary defense grid flickered uncertainly, and the massive orbital platforms that should have been shining beacons were dim and lifeless. "How long has it been like this?" Marcus asked quietly. "The degradation began 3 years ago," Zephys replied, her voice heavy with grief. "Slowly at first, then accelerating as the heart's output became more unstable. We've had to shut down entire sectors to preserve power for essential systems. The planetary capital was a marvel of bioarchitectural engineering, its spires grown rather than built, shaped by generations of dragonfire into forms that seemed to flow like frozen music. But here too, Marcus could see the evidence of failing power systems. Transportation tubes that should have hummed with energy sat silent, and the bioluminescent panels that provided lighting flickered at random intervals. They brought him to the heart chamber, a vast crystalline cathedral at the planet's core. The original heart of Draconis sat in the center, easily 10 times larger than the backup crystal on the ship. The damage here was even more severe, cracks spreading like a spiderweb through the massive structure. Worse, Marcus could see that some sections had already gone completely dark. Their quantum matrices collapsed beyond any hope of conventional repair. "Goddess preserve us," Virana whispered. "It's worse than I thought." Marcus walked slowly around the crystal, his portable scanners painting complex energy maps in the air around him. The quantum structure was indeed failing, but not randomly. The damage followed specific patterns, stress points where the original design had been pushed beyond its intended limits. "Your ancestors built this to power a much smaller civilization," he said finally. "You've been asking it to do more and more over the millennia, and it's finally reached its breaking point. Can you fix it?" Korthak asked, and Marcus heard the desperation beneath the dragon's proud exterior. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his engineer's mind running through possibilities. "Not fix, no, but I think I can do something better. I think I can help you build something that will last another 10,000 years. He turned to face the 3 dragons, his expression serious. "But it's going to require something that might be even harder for your people than trusting human engineering. It's going to require admitting that your ancestors, brilliant as they were, made some fundamental design choices that we can improve upon." The silence in the chamber was deafening. Finally, Korthak spoke. "Explain." Marcus gestured toward the failing crystal. "This is a masterpiece of quantum engineering, but it's also a product of its time. Your ancestors built it when your civilization was centered on a single world, when your power needs were a fraction of what they are now. They designed it to be perfect and eternal, but they didn't design it to grow." He pulled out his chalk again, sketching on the crystalline floor. "What I'm proposing is modular architecture, distributed processing, and most importantly, evolutionary capability. Instead of one massive crystal trying to handle everything, we build a network of smaller matrices. each optimized for specific functions. You want to break apart the heart of Draconis? Cephas sounded horrified. I want to set it free, Marcus corrected. Right now it's trapped by its own perfection. But if we segment the quantum matrix, introduce controlled instability at the interface points, and design the whole system for organic growth, then your civilization can expand without ever hitting these limits again. Virana studied his sketches with the eye of someone who understood engineering principles, even if the specific approach was foreign to her. The redundancy would eliminate single points of failure, she mused, and the modular design would allow for component upgrades without system shutdown. Exactly. Plus, and this is the really elegant part, we can use the existing damage as natural breakpoints for the segmentation. Instead of fighting the cracks, we embrace them, turn them into features instead of bugs. Marcus looked up at the three dragons, seeing uncertainty, fear, and just a hint of hope in their ancient eyes. I know it sounds insane. I know it goes against everything your people believe about the heart. But conventional approaches say this crystal is dying, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. I'm offering you a chance to not just save your world, but to build something that will serve your people for millennia to come. Korthak was quiet for a long time, his golden eyes fixed on the failing crystal. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of 10,000 years of tradition. Our council will need to approve such radical changes. They will not decide easily. How long do we have? Marcus asked. The council convenes at the next solar alignment in 4 days. Until then, we wait. Marcus looked at the dying heart, watching its light flicker like a candle in the wind. 4 days to convince an entire civilization to abandon their most sacred traditions in favor of human engineering principles. 4 days to bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and modern innovation. Then I guess I'd better come up with a really convincing presentation, he said, rolling up his sleeves once again. Marcus spent the next 4 days building the most important presentation of his life. Working in a crystal chamber beneath the heart, he constructed a scale model of his proposed solution, using salvaged components from his junkyard and dragon technology provided by his hosts. The model was crude by dragon standards, but functionally perfect, demonstrating every principle he intended to apply to the real heart. The Council of Ancients met in a vast amphitheater carved from living rock, its walls lined with crystalline formations that hummed with residual energy. 12 of the largest and oldest dragons Marcus had ever seen arranged themselves in a perfect circle, their scales bearing the patina of centuries and their eyes holding the accumulated wisdom of ages. At the center of the circle sat the eldest of them all, a dragon so ancient that her scales had turned pure white, and her eyes held depths that seemed to stretch back to the beginning of time itself. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that resonated in dimensions Marcus couldn't quite perceive. I am Thessarian the Eternal, first speaker of the council, she said, each word carefully measured. We have heard disturbing reports of a human who claims he can improve upon the work of the ancients. Speak, small one, and let us judge the worth of your words. Marcus stood in the center of the circle, acutely aware of how small and fragile he appeared surrounded by these magnificent beings. But he'd spent decades learning to work with beings who could crush him without effort, and he'd found that confidence and competence usually transcended physical differences. Honored ancients, he began, his voice carrying clearly in the crystalline acoustics of the chamber. I come before you not to diminish the achievements of your ancestors, but to build upon them. The heart of Draconis is dying, and conventional wisdom says it cannot be saved. I believe there is another way. He activated his portable projector, filling the air above him with 3-dimensional holographic displays. The dragons leaned forward despite themselves, their ancient eyes studying the rotating technical diagrams with obvious expertise. Your ancestors created something beautiful and powerful, Marcus continued, but they were designing for a different time, a smaller civilization with more limited needs. What worked perfectly for 10,000 years has now reached its natural limits. A massive bronze dragon near the back of the circle snorted dismissively. And you, a creature who has existed for less than a single draconic lifetime, presume to understand our technology better than we do? Marcus met the dragon's gaze without flinching. No, honored one. I understand human technology, and I understand the principles of adaptive engineering that have kept my species alive in a hostile galaxy. Sometimes an outside perspective can see solutions that familiarity obscures. He gestured to his holographic display, which now showed a detailed analysis of the heart's current quantum state. The damage to your heart follows predictable patterns. The quantum matrix is failing at stress points where the original design has been pushed beyond its intended parameters. But instead of seeing this as purely destructive, what if we view it as evolutionary pressure? Thessarian's ancient eyes narrowed. Explain this concept of evolutionary pressure as it applies to crystalline matrices. Marcus smiled, sensing genuine curiosity beneath the formal challenge. In human engineering, we've learned that systems designed to adapt and grow are more robust than systems designed to be perfect. Your heart was created to be eternal and unchanging, but your civilization has changed dramatically around it. He activated another projection, this one showing his proposed modular network design. What I'm suggesting is a fundamental shift in approach. Instead of one massive crystal handling all processing, we create a distributed network of smaller matrices, each specialized for specific functions but all quantum entangled with each other. The dragons studied the projection in silence, their combined mental processing power far exceeding anything Marcus could achieve. Finally, a dragon with scales like polished obsidian spoke up. The redundancy would indeed eliminate cascading failures, she admitted reluctantly, and the modular architecture would allow for expansion without complete system redesign. Exactly. But more than that, Marcus said, warming to his subject. This approach would actually honor your ancestors' original vision. I've been studying your ancient texts, particularly the Song of Making. A ripple of surprise went through the council. Thessarian's head tilted with interest. You claim to understand the song? It has been analyzed by our greatest scholars for millennia. Marcus pulled up another display, this one showing spectral analyses of the song's harmonics overlaid with quantum resonance patterns. Your ancestors didn't just create the heart, they created an entire cultural framework to preserve the knowledge of how to rebuild it. The song contains precise technical specifications disguised as religious poetry. The silence that followed was profound. Several of the dragons exchanged glances that spoke of centuries of shared experience and understanding. Impossible, the bronze dragon said, but his voice lacked conviction. The song is sacred tradition, not technical documentation. Marcus activated a small device he'd built, one that began playing the song while simultaneously generating quantum harmonics that matched its musical patterns. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The crystal formations around the chamber began to resonate in sympathy, their light growing brighter and more stable. Your ancestors were brilliant beyond words, Marcus said as the harmonics filled the chamber. They embedded engineering knowledge so deeply in your culture that it survived 7,000 years of social upheaval. But they also understood something that modern dragon engineering seems to have forgotten. The most robust systems are those that can adapt and evolve. Thessarian rose to her full height, her ancient form radiating power and authority. You ask us to fundamentally alter the most sacred artifact of our people, based on principles we do not fully understand, implemented by a being whose species we have known for less than a century. Marcus nodded, understanding the magnitude of what he was asking. I do, because the alternative is watching your world die while clinging to traditions that, however beautiful and meaningful they may be, are no longer sufficient to meet your needs. He deactivated his projections and stood alone in the center of the circle, looking up at the 12 most powerful beings on Draconis Prime. But I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm asking you to trust the principles that built your civilization in the first place: innovation, adaptation, and the courage to reach beyond what has always been done toward what could be done. The council deliberated for hours while Marcus waited in an adjacent chamber. He could hear the rumble of their voices through the crystal walls, sometimes rising in heated debate, sometimes falling to thoughtful whispers. When they finally summoned him back, Thessarian's expression was unreadable. The council has reached a decision, she announced. By a margin of 7-5, we have voted to allow you to attempt your modifications to the heart of Draconis. Marcus felt relief flood through him, followed immediately by the crushing weight of responsibility. Thank you, honored ones. I won't let you down. You may yet, Thessarian said gravely, because we have also decided that if your modifications fail, if the heart is destroyed or damaged beyond repair, you will be held accountable for the death of our world. The ancient dragon's eyes fixed on Marcus with laser intensity. Do you understand what this means, human engineer? You now hold the fate of an entire civilization in your hands. Success will make you a legend among our people. Failure will make you the most reviled being in dragon history. Marcus met her gaze steadily, feeling the weight of 10,000 years of dragon civilization pressing down on him. I understand, Honored One, and I accept the responsibility. Then may the ancients guide your hands, the Sarian said. Begin when you are ready. Marcus stood before the heart of Draconis with a toolkit that would have made any dragon engineer weep in horror. Salvaged human scanners jury-rigged with alien components, quantum resonators built from junkyard scraps, and a harmonic generator that looked like it had been assembled by a madman, which Marcus reflected might not be far from the truth. The chamber had been cleared of all but essential personnel. Korthak, Virana, and Zephys maintained a respectful distance while Marcus worked, ready to evacuate the chamber at a moment's notice if his modifications triggered a catastrophic failure. Above them, he knew, the entire Council of Ancients was monitoring every energy fluctuation through remote sensors. Beginning Phase 1, Marcus announced, his voice echoing in the crystal chamber. Quantum mapping of the primary stress fractures. He activated his modified scanners, sending coherent energy pulses deep into the heart's crystal matrix. The readouts were terrifying in their complexity. The quantum lattice was far more damaged than even he had realized, with microfractures spreading through dimensions he could barely perceive. But beneath the chaos he could see the underlying patterns that confirmed his theories. The damage follows the natural grain boundaries of the original crystal growth, he muttered, adjusting his scanner settings. Just like I thought. Your ancestors grew this thing in segments and then fused them together. The cracks are spreading along the original fusion lines. Virana's voice came from behind him, tight with worry. Is that significant? Marcus grinned without taking his eyes off his instruments. It's perfect. Instead of fighting against the crystal's natural structure, we're going to work with it. Korthak, I need you to start the song of making, but at exactly half the traditional tempo. The great dragon's voice filled the chamber, the ancient words carrying harmonics that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Marcus watched his instruments as the quantum resonance patterns shifted, the chaotic energy fluctuations beginning to stabilize into coherent waveforms. That's it. Marcus breathed. The song isn't just ceremonial, it's a quantum tuning protocol. Your ancestors used it to maintain the crystal's stability during major modifications. He began the most delicate part of the operation, using precisely calibrated energy pulses to encourage the existing cracks to propagate along predetermined paths. It was like performing surgery on the fabric of reality itself, requiring split-second timing and absolute precision. The first crack extension went perfectly, following the natural grain boundary exactly as Marcus had predicted. The second one wavered slightly, but corrected itself when he adjusted the harmonic frequency. By the fourth crack, he was working with the confidence of someone who truly understood the system he was modifying. Remarkable, Zephys said, studying the energy readouts. You're not damaging the crystal, you're helping it evolve. Exactly. The quantum matrix wants to segment along these lines, but it's been held together by sheer force of will for millennia. I'm just giving it permission to become what it's trying to be. The real test came when Marcus began introducing the bridging matrices, small quantum processors that would link the segmented crystal into a cohesive network. These were his own design, built from salvaged alien components and human engineering principles. If they didn't integrate properly with the ancient crystal, the entire system could collapse. The first bridge matrix slid into place with a soft chime that resonated through multiple dimensions. Marcus held his breath as the quantum fields aligned, watching his instruments for any sign of rejection or incompatibility. Instead, he saw something beautiful. The ancient crystal was adapting to accept the new component, its quantum structure actually shifting to accommodate the foreign technology. Impossible, Korthak rumbled, his song faltering for a moment. The heart is accepting alien technology as if it were part of the original design. Marcus smiled, understanding something that the dragons had forgotten about their own technology. Your ancestors built this to grow and adapt. The quantum matrix is designed to incorporate new components automatically, but you've been treating it like a static artifact for so long that its adaptive capabilities went dormant. As he installed each bridging matrix, the heart's quantum stability increased exponentially. The chaotic energy fluctuations were smoothing out into coherent patterns, and the failing sections were beginning to regenerate as they came online with the network. But the final test was yet to come. Marcus had to activate the complete network simultaneously, linking all segments into a unified system while maintaining perfect harmonic balance. If he got the timing wrong, if any of the bridging matrices failed to synchronize, the resulting quantum cascade could destroy not just the heart, but the entire planetary core. Phase 3 commencing, Marcus announced, his voice steadier than he felt. Full network activation in 10 seconds. He began the countdown, his hands dancing over controls that no human had ever operated before. At 0, he triggered the activation sequence and held his breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the heart began to sing. It started as a low harmonic barely at the edge of perception, but quickly grew into something that seemed to encompass every frequency in the universe. The crystal segments lit up one by one, their individual lights merging into patterns of breathtaking complexity. Energy flowed through the bridging matrices like rivers of liquid starlight, and the quantum fields aligned with mathematical precision. By the ancients, the Saurian's voice came through the communication system, filled with wonder. The power output is increasing beyond theoretical maximums. Marcus watched his instruments in amazement as the heart's energy production climbed steadily upward. Not only had they saved the ancient crystal, they had enhanced it beyond its original capabilities. The modular network was distributing the quantum processing load so efficiently that each segment was operating at optimal capacity. Network stability at 98% and climbing, Virana reported, her voice filled with excitement. Quantum resonance is perfect across all segments. Marcus, you did it. You actually did it. But Marcus wasn't celebrating yet. He was studying the long-term projections, the computer models that showed how the system would evolve over time. What he saw made him smile with genuine satisfaction. It's not just fixed, he said, finally allowing himself to relax. It's future-proof. The network will continue to adapt and grow as your civilization expands. You could power 100 worlds with this system and it would automatically optimize itself for maximum efficiency. Korthak approached the renewed heart, his ancient eyes wide with wonder. You have given us more than we dared hope for, human engineer. You have given us the ability to reach for the stars without fear. Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead and grinned at the 3 dragons who had become his friends over the past weeks. That's what humans do best. We take impossible problems and find ways to make them work. Sometimes the solution isn't to fix what's broken, but to help it become something better. The heart of Draconis pulsed with renewed life, its light filling the chamber with patterns of stunning beauty. Above them, Marcus knew, the lights of Draconis Prime were coming back online. The orbital platforms resuming their eternal vigil, and the crystalline cities beginning to shine with their full glory once again. But more than that, they had proven that cooperation between species could achieve things that neither could accomplish alone. Human adaptability and dragon wisdom, working together to solve problems that had seemed impossible. 3 months after the heart's restoration, Marcus found himself in a position he'd never expected. Guest of honor at the grandest celebration in dragon history. The Festival of Renewal had been declared a planetary holiday, with crystalline cities across Draconis Prime illuminated in patterns that honored both ancient traditions and new possibilities. But what amazed Marcus most wasn't the ceremony itself, but the changes he could see in dragon society. The modular approach he'd used on the heart had sparked a renaissance of innovation throughout their civilization. Engineers who had spent centuries maintaining static systems were suddenly experimenting with adaptive designs. Artists were creating crystalline sculptures that evolved over time. Even the dragon's social structures were becoming more flexible and responsive. You have done more than repair our heart, the Saurian said, as they stood together on a balcony overlooking the capital city. You have reminded us that growth and change are not enemies of tradition, but its natural continuation, Marcus nodded, watching young dragons practice aerial maneuvers that incorporated techniques borrowed from a dozen different species. Your people are natural innovators. They just needed permission to remember that. The celebration was interrupted by an urgent message from the orbital monitoring stations. A massive fleet was approaching the system, but they weren't broadcasting any identification codes. Worse, their quantum signatures matched those of the Void Seekers, the same species that had damaged the heart 3 years earlier. Within minutes, the festive atmosphere had transformed into organized preparation for war. Dragons took to the skies in formations that blended ancient tactics with modern technology, while the planetary defense grid came online with power levels that would have been impossible before the Heart's enhancement. "They've returned for revenge," Korthak said grimly as they watched the approaching fleet on tactical displays. "Our victory over their resonance weapon 3 years ago cost them an entire battle group. They won't make the same mistake twice." Marcus studied the enemy formation with the eye of someone who had spent decades analyzing alien technology. "Actually, I don't think they're here for revenge. Look at their approach vector. The way they're maintaining formation. This isn't an attack pattern. It's a demonstration of force." His assessment proved correct when the Void Seeker fleet stopped just outside the system's defensive perimeter and broadcast a message on all frequencies. The transmission showed a being that looked like living shadow wrapped around a framework of crystalline bone, its voice carrying harmonics that seemed to drain warmth from the air. "Dragons of the dying light," the Void Seeker commander said, its words dripping with malevolent satisfaction. "We have returned to witness your final moments. Our quantum resonance scanners show that your heart continues to decay. Soon your world will be dark and we will claim the ruins as our own." The response came not from the dragons but from Marcus himself. He had Korthak patch him into the communication system, and his very human voice carried across space to the waiting fleet. "Void Seeker vessel. This is Engineer Marcus Chen of the Draconis Prime, Technical Advisory Board. You might want to update your sensor readings before you make any hasty decisions." The pause that followed was long enough for Marcus to imagine the confusion on the alien command ship. Finally, the Void Seeker commander responded, "Human? What is a human doing in dragon space? And what relevance could your words possibly have to our conquest?" Marcus smiled, and at his gesture, Korthak activated the Heart's new demonstration mode. The quantum signature that reached the Void Seeker fleet was unlike anything they had encountered before. Not the flickering, unstable pattern of a dying crystal, but the steady, powerful resonance of something that had transcended its original limitations. "The relevance," Marcus said calmly, "is that your intelligence is about 3 months out of date. The heart of Draconis isn't dying anymore. In fact, it's operating at about 300% of its original capacity." The silence from the Void Seeker fleet was profound. Marcus could imagine their technicians frantically recalibrating their sensors, trying to understand readings that should have been impossible. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, "the dragons have been kind enough to share some of their technical innovations with other species in the region. The Zenthari Confederation, the Thraxian Republic, and about a dozen other civilizations are all implementing similar quantum network technologies. Your little empire is now surrounded by worlds with power systems that make your resonance weapons look like children's toys." It was mostly bluff, but Marcus delivered it with the confidence of someone who had spent his life turning impossible situations to his advantage. And besides, the dragons had indeed been sharing some of their newfound knowledge with allied species. The Void Seeker commander's next transmission carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "You lie, human. Our resonance weapons destroyed the heart once. They can do so again. You're welcome to try," Marcus said cheerfully. "But you should know that the new modular network design is specifically engineered to absorb and redirect resonance weapon attacks. Instead of destroying the crystal, your weapons would actually supercharge it. We'd probably send you a thank you note." This was less of a bluff than it sounded. The bridging matrices Marcus had installed were designed to handle massive quantum fluctuations, and he was reasonably confident they could survive a resonance weapon attack. More importantly, the distributed nature of the system meant that even if some segments were damaged, the rest would continue operating. The Void Seeker fleet hung in space for nearly an hour, their commanders apparently debating their options. Finally, they transmitted one last message. "This is not over, dragons. We will find a way to claim what should rightfully be ours." "Actually," Marcus replied before the dragons could respond, "I think it is over. You see, the thing about evolution is that species that don't adapt eventually get left behind. The dragons adapted. Your people apparently haven't." The Void Seeker fleet departed without firing a single shot, their quantum drives leaving ripples in space-time that spoke of retreat rather than tactical repositioning. As celebrations resumed across Draconis Prime, Marcus found himself reflecting on the strange path that had brought him here. A year ago, he had been a lonely old engineer working in a junkyard, content to solve small problems with discarded technology. Now he was helping reshape the balance of power in an entire sector of the galaxy. What will you do now? Virana asked as they watched the last of the Void Seeker ships disappear into hyperspace. Will you return to your junkyard? Marcus considered the question seriously. His little moon was still there, still filled with the broken dreams of a dozen species. But he was beginning to think that perhaps his real calling wasn't fixing discarded technology, but helping entire civilizations discover new ways to grow and adapt. I think, he said slowly, that the galaxy is full of problems that need solving, and I think there are probably other species out there who could benefit from a little human perspective on the impossible. Korthak rumbled with what Marcus had learned to recognize as dragon laughter. The Council has discussed this possibility. If you are willing, we would be honored to provide you with a ship and crew for such endeavors. The dragons owe you a debt that cannot be repaid, but perhaps we can help you share your gifts with others who need them. Marcus looked up at the stars, thinking of all the civilizations out there struggling with problems they considered unsolvable, all the ancient technologies slowly failing for lack of fresh perspective, all the opportunities for cooperation between species who thought they had nothing to learn from each other. You know what? He said, grinning at his dragon friends. That sounds like exactly the kind of impossible job that a crazy old human engineer might be able to handle. 5 years later, Marcus Chen's name had become legend across 17 star systems. The elderly human engineer who traveled with a crew of dragons, solving impossible problems and teaching entire civilizations to see their limitations as opportunities for growth. His ship, the Stellar Harmony, was itself a testament to cross-species cooperation. Built with dragon bioarchitecture but incorporating human modular design principles, it could adapt its configuration for different missions while maintaining perfect structural integrity. The crew was equally diverse. Korthak served as captain, Virana as chief engineer, Zephys as navigator, and Marcus as what they diplomatically called the chief innovation consultant. Their latest mission had brought them to the edge of known space, where the aquatic hydrants were facing the collapse of their vast underwater cities. The problem seemed impossible. Their entire civilization was built around coral-like organisms that had suddenly begun dying en masse, victims of a quantum plague that spread faster than any containment effort. 17 cities have gone dark in the past month, the Hydran representative, a graceful being whose translucent skin rippled with bioluminescent patterns, explained through the translation interface. Our greatest scientists say the plague cannot be stopped. We face the extinction of everything we have built over the last millennium. Marcus studied the data streams flowing around him, his aged eyes taking in patterns that spoke of quantum cascade failures, triggered by some unknown external influence. At 78, he was slower than he used to be, but his mind remained as sharp as ever. The plague isn't natural, he said finally. Look at the propagation pattern. It's following the quantum resonance networks that your cities use for communication and power distribution. Something is using your own infrastructure against you. The hydrant's bioluminescence flickered in patterns that suggested skepticism. Our networks have operated flawlessly for centuries. How could they suddenly become vectors for destruction? Marcus smiled, recognizing the same kind of thinking that had nearly doomed the dragons. That's exactly why they're vulnerable. Perfect systems that never change become brittle over time. They lose the ability to adapt to new threats. Working with the Hydran scientists, Marcus began to map the quantum signatures of the plague. What he found confirmed his suspicions. The destructive patterns matched theoretical predictions for a weapon system that the long-vanished architect species had supposedly developed but never deployed. The architects, Korthak said when Marcus shared his findings. They disappeared from the galaxy over 2 million years ago. How could their weapons be active now? They're not active, Marcus replied, pulling up star charts that showed the progression of the plague. They're being activated. Someone found an architect weapons cache and figured out how to use it. The answer came from an unexpected source, the Void Seekers. Still bitter over their humiliation at Draconis Prime, they had spent years searching for weapons powerful enough to overcome the dragon's enhanced defenses. Their exploration of dead worlds had led them to an architect facility, where they had awakened technologies that even they didn't fully understand. They're testing the weapon on the Hydrans, Virana realized as they analyzed intercepted communications, learning how it works before they turn it against stronger targets. Marcus felt a familiar anger building in his chest. The Void Seekers were willing to destroy an entire civilization just to field test a weapon they wanted to use against his friends. It was the kind of casual cruelty that reminded him why humanity had learned to value cooperation over conquest. We need to stop the plague first, then deal with the Void Seekers, he decided. Korthak, how fast can you get us to the primary Hydran city? 6 hours at maximum acceleration, the dragon replied. But Marcus, even if we can save one city, how do we stop a quantum weapon that can strike anywhere in the galaxy? Marcus was already sketching plans on his portable display, his mind racing through possibilities. We don't stop the weapon. We turn it against itself. The solution he proposed was typically audacious. Instead of trying to cure the quantum plague, they would give it what it wanted. The plague was designed to feed on stable quantum systems, converting their orderly energy into chaos. But what if they could create a quantum system so perfectly ordered, so irresistibly attractive to the plague, that it would abandon its other targets? A quantum honey trap, Cephas said, studying Marcus's plans with obvious admiration. You want to build a synthetic quantum matrix that mimics a Hydran city, but with resonance patterns specifically designed to attract the plague. Exactly. And once the plague is concentrated in our trap, we hit it with a controlled quantum cascade that destroys the whole system. The plague gets wiped out and the Hydran cities are free to heal. Building the trap required cooperation between all three species. The dragons provided the raw quantum engineering expertise. The Hydrans contributed their biological resonance technology. And Marcus designed the integration systems that would make it all work together. The construction took place in the depths of space, far from any inhabited system. Working around the clock, they assembled a quantum matrix the size of a small moon. Its crystalline structure incorporating the best elements of dragon, Hydran, and human technology. When they activated the trap, the effect was immediate and dramatic. Across 17 star systems, the quantum plague began to shift direction, abandoning the dying Hydran cities in favor of the irresistible target Marcus had created. Like water flowing downhill, the destructive energy poured into the trap, concentrating itself into an increasingly dense mass of chaotic quantum fluctuations. Plague concentration at 70% and rising, Virana reported from the Stellar Harmonies Bridge. The Hydran cities are already beginning to show signs of recovery. Marcus watched the energy readings climb toward the critical threshold he had calculated. Too early and some of the plague would escape. Too late, and the trap itself might destabilize catastrophically. 85%, he announced. 90. 95. At exactly 97% concentration, Marcus triggered the cascade that collapsed the entire quantum matrix in on itself. The resulting implosion was visible across half the galaxy, a brief star of pure energy that consumed both the trap and every trace of the architect plague. In the aftermath, as they surveyed the recovering Hydran cities and calculated the lives they had saved, Marcus felt the familiar satisfaction of a problem elegantly solved. But he also felt something else, the weight of years and the knowledge that his time in the galaxy was growing short. You're thinking of retiring. Korthak observed with the insight that came from years of friendship. Marcus nodded, looking out at the stars that had become his second home. I'm almost 80, my friend. I've had a good run, but maybe it's time to let younger minds take over the impossible problems. The galaxy needs your perspective, Virana protested. Who else thinks the way you do? Who else sees solutions where everyone else sees only problems? Marcus smiled, understanding something that his dragon friends didn't quite grasp yet. The galaxy doesn't need me specifically. It needs the approach I represent. The willingness to question assumptions, to see failure as opportunity, to believe that cooperation between different species can achieve things that none of us could manage alone. He gestured toward the recovering Hydran cities, their bioluminescent networks already beginning to pulse with renewed life. You've all learned to think like human engineers now. You see modular solutions where you used to see monolithic problems. You understand that the best systems are those that can grow and adapt. Over the following months, as word of the Hydran salvation spread throughout the galaxy, Marcus began to see the true scope of what they had accomplished. It wasn't just about solving individual crises, but about changing how entire civilizations approached problems. Species that had been stuck in traditional thinking for millennia were suddenly experimenting with adaptive technologies and cooperative solutions. Dragons established the Marcus Chen Institute for Adaptive Engineering, dedicated to training problem solvers from all species in the principles of modular design and cross-cultural cooperation. The Hydrans created floating cities that could reconfigure themselves to meet changing needs. Even former enemies like the Thraxians began incorporating human engineering principles into their own technology. When Marcus finally returned to his little moon and its junkyard of broken dreams, he found it transformed. Young engineers from dozens of species had made pilgrimages to the place where the legendary human had worked his first miracle. They had turned the junkyard into a working laboratory, a place where impossible problems came to find unexpected solutions. "You've started something that will outlive us all," Korthak said as they stood together among the organized chaos of salvaged alien technology. "Centuries from now, when beings across the galaxy encounter problems that seem unsolvable, they'll ask themselves, what would the old human engineer do?" Marcus smiled, running his weathered hands over a quantum resonator that some young Xanthari engineer had built, using principles that didn't exist when he first arrived here. "Then I guess my work here is done." But even as he spoke, his eyes were already moving to a new challenge. A Kalian navigation matrix that everyone said was impossible to repair, sitting right there in the corner of his workshop, practically begging for attention. Marcus Chen rolled up his sleeves and got back to work. After all, impossible problems weren't going to solve themselves.